as somebody who is in wildlife, you have to expose yourself to it. If you don't cry, you can't make your audience cry. If you don't make your audience cry, no change is gonna happen, right? A lot of people don't know how problematic it is because the general narrative.
Hello and welcome to the Punch Pod. My name is Panchsheel and this is a podcast where I talk about creativity, art, and everything in between. Joining me today is Akansha Tiwari. Akansha is a wildlife filmmaker who has been working on marine and conservation stories. She has directed Tangled Seas, which is a widely recognized film on the problem of discarded fishing gear in the Indian Ocean. Being the Jackson Wild Summit Fellow in 2020, she has been an active part of their collective. She has also worked with various production houses across the country and is currently making films of her own. Today, I talked to her about her journey to becoming a wildlife filmmaker, freelancing in India, and the ethical dilemmas that come with filmmaking. Akansha, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
I know that you're always working on 4 or 5 different projects related to wildlife at any given point. So take me back to the beginning. What actually made you interested in wildlife? What made you realize that this wildlife filmmaking is something that I want to make a career out of?
So, growing up, I was this kid who was 3 years old who would sit in front of the TV and watch Nat Geo and be like, when I grow up, I want to do this. And it started from something which has become a negative memory for me right now. But I used to like watching the Sea Park and all those shows where they were training wildlife, they were training dolphins, they were training different kind of marine wildlife, and I used to be like, oh, this looks interesting, I want to do that when I grow up. But obviously that's wrong because that is keeping them captive. But that is how it started, and I would watch a lot of wildlife films and be like, this is something that I can probably do when I grow up. Also because animals were some of the closest friends that I had growing up, so they were kind of my comfort zone, and I liked storytelling a lot, so it was kind of a mix of everything together.
But what was that journey like? Okay, so when did you decide wildlife is what I want to do? And then what were the steps that, got you to where you are?
So I always wanted to do it, but I thought science would be the way to go through that. So I studied science till the first year, and that didn't work out. I was studying in Vadias, and then I failed terribly in chemistry. I got like a 8 out of 100 in organic chemistry, and I thought about dropping out of there. And then I realized that I need a media background and not so much of a science background, because anyway it's filmmaking. And I joined Symbiosis, and I joined there because I want to be a journalist and I wanted to do like travel journalism and all of that. And then in the first semester, I realized, hey, I can get back to filmmaking over here by doing AV. So that is when that switch happened.
You said that you started off doing a degree in science, then dropped out in the first year, and then you switched to a filmmaking degree. When one is getting into wildlife, what do you think is the best path to take? Do you think getting a degree in pure sciences first and then switching to film is important, or what is it like?
I would suggest you get a film or a mass communication degree, because you can learn whatever topic you want to study based on the film and the topic that you're doing that time. But filmmaking is something that's far more technical, and you need to be able to understand how storytelling and shots work, and the psychology behind that is how equipment works, how the camera needs to be, setting up a tripod, something as simple as that, and all the basics of that. So I would suggest that you get, if you want to get a formal education, you get one in filmmaking as compared to the science, because science will only give you, at least in India, most of the courses will give you like a specialized education. For example, if it's marine biology, so what will you do when you're making a film on tigers? That is as good as irrelevant, right? You have to do research from the beginning anyway. So I would suggest that you do a film or a film related course.
But how are these two things different? Let's say I am a person who has done a degree in science, full 4 years I've done in marine conservation or something like that, and I want to pivot to filmmaking. How difficult is it for me as someone who's come from a science background to get into that, to get a foot in the door at least?
It is going to be a little difficult because, can I be cynical?
Yeah,
A
sure.
little bit. The Indian education system, I was not going to lash out against anybody, but that didn't happen, is very limiting. And when you do science, it kind of puts you through this structure this rigid structure where your creativity dies. To some, I mean, I think you've also done science, right? And then we both dropped out of it and realized that's not working. At least for people like us, it didn't work. It kind of puts you in this structure and you can't think out of that box. So it becomes a little difficult. I'll give you a quick example. Whenever we judge films, or, we look at all these as a part of the collective or whatever in film festivals, you can tell if the story is written by somebody from the science background, because it is very technical. They think their list of importance is a little different than what it would be for a storyteller or a filmmaker. Like, they would include the species name, the scientific name for no reason, which nobody can pronounce and it's going to go above everybody's head. They make films for that community, while a filmmaker would make a film for everybody, somebody from the film background. Because filmmakers tend to simplify it. That is also, not everybody does that, but they simplify the story to make it palatable for everybody, or at least their target group, which is something people from the science background struggle with, because we are so used to studying and, getting specialized in whatever we do and learning, and it's just very mechanical comparatively. So
Is a distinction that apparent if the film is made by someone who comes from science?
yeah, I'm judging this World Wildlife Day event for Jackson Wild. I could tell there's a film on turtles, and I could tell that this person is from the science background, and I looked her up and she was. They are somebody who have moved from science to film, because it is very technical. Like, they have explained the life cycle of the turtle, but it's not a story. Like, just a simple example, if a science person is doing it, they will talk about the steps in the biological process and the biological cycle of events of that turtle. But a filmmaker or somebody from the arts background, or somebody who writes, who does creative writing, would write it more in a story format. So it was very it's very jarring also. Comparatively, it's very lengthy and it's very complicated, and like how papers are, how theses are written in science, they have to complicate everything and use these words which don't make sense to anyone, so you can tell.
You just said that the people who make films, who come from science backgrounds, make it for their communities. And a filmmaker, on the other hand, someone who comes from a creative background, makes it for everyone. What about you? Where do you fall in this category? What kind of films do you make? And where do you think you fall in this?
I would say I started off as being somebody, because I was from the science background, I kind of struggled with the storytelling and the creative writing part of it. And I'm just learning that right now through psychology and target audience, and, making those groups and understanding who the film is for. Initially, I was making films for people like me, which doesn't take the story too far away. It is just like, we studied in college in, I think, documentary or some module where they said documentaries are films made for us by us, right? Something like that. So I didn't want that to happen. So right now, what I work with depends on the topic and my target group. Like with Tangled Seas, it seems very complicated for somebody who's not from the background. It is very scientific, but it is not for us. It's for the fishermen. They are the target audience, fishermen and divers. So it is going to be technical for somebody who doesn't have access to the underwater world and to the ocean, but for them it makes sense. So I work with target groups now, and there's another film that I'm working on which is on roadkills. So that is for somebody like us, somebody who drives, somebody who lives in the city, somebody who has highways near forest areas. So I work with target audience, but I'm trying to move to entertainment, because everything has become digital. There are like hundreds and thousands of films being uploaded online on so many platforms, almost every minute, every second. So it makes no sense for me to make another YouTube like, not that YouTube is bad, YouTube like Doordarshani information heavy content. So I'm kind of moving towards entertainment a little bit. And a lot of these genres are kind of diluting. Nothing is specific right now, like nobody's making films of maybe natural history, or only, something, only conservation. They are always a mix right now, because people don't watch people outside our group don't watch those kind of films. So from our group, they already know what's happening, right? They're already conscious people. So we want the other people to watch. So we have to make it relevant to them. We have to make it like, if you compare Tangled Seas and the other film that I'm working on, Tangled Seas was very technical. It was interviews, but the roadkill film is like a story. So
I like what you said about, people aren't watching, like no one's really specializing in one kind of thing. Why do you think that is? Why aren't people specializing, or is everyone moving to a point where they have to have a finger in different kinds of holes so that they have enough work? That came off wrong, but you get what I mean.
yeah.
So does everyone have to be a multi-potentialite, a multi-specialist, or do you think the time of people having to specialize in only one thing and be the greatest at it, do you think that time has gone?
Okay, this is not to be negative against anybody, but including us for that matter, people from sciences are moving to arts a lot because they think filmmaking is easy. I'm sure it might be for a lot of them. I'm nobody to judge. That's not the point. But a lot of new people are joining the industry every day, and to be relevant in this industry, you need to be multi-talented. You need to be able to fill more than one job, because at least with wildlife, we can't be more than 3 or 4 people on a shoot, no matter how big the project is, because it's a wild space. You cannot have, like fiction, you can't have 12 and 20, you can't have 3 ADs. The AD has to record sound, the AD has to be the production assistant. So you need to be skilled in a lot more than just one department, at least in terms of wildlife. So it works for them. And if you were talking about the genre, the way people think has changed. I was reading that book which we used for our creative writing class. I don't remember the. So I was reading that, and it talks about how our thinking has become visual. If you look at old stories, they would do a lot of exposition before, they would explain verbally what is happening. They would say things out loud, but now they just have visuals. Like if you look at Chinatown, was it? I don't know. Which was that film? I don't remember. So they basically just showed a picture of a beach, and the taxi driver just looks at it, and you know that they're thinking about it as a vacation spot. You don't have to explain, you don't have to say it out loud that I want to go to Hawaii for a vacation. We think visually. And it's just going to become even more difficult with the younger generation now, because they depend on their phone for everything. And that's why they're also struggling with distinguishing what is entertainment and what is learning, because their videos are also in the same format. They don't switch off. They're watching Chota Bheem, and then the next thing they're watching an animated educational video, and they don't know the difference. If they were taught something from Dora the Explorer, and which they don't watch anymore. They watch weird things. But if they watch something which is from the education thing, they don't know. They're too young to understand what is factual, what is not, what is learning, and what is just entertainment. So
let me ask you this though. You said that we're moving towards a more digital, more visual world. Do you not think that so much of inundation of images, especially in wildlife where, there's animals who are hurt, there's like some poor dog with a broken leg or something like that. Do you not think so many images of showing this kind of stuff will lead to desensitization of the audience, because they keep seeing so much stuff? If the audience is desensitized, they won't just care. They just won't care about it. I've seen this happen. I see something, I'm like, oh, whatever. I see something really horrid, which I should have a visceral reaction to. But I'm just like, meh. It's whatever. As a filmmaker, how do you navigate this kind of space?
It depends a lot on the ethics a filmmaker follows and what background they come from. But sometimes some stories, some budgets force you to just give what the audience wants. Like if you look at all these fiction films that are happening, it's all violence, it's all hate, it's working. No, no, don't say. We're not talking about them, but it's working for the current narrative that the society wants. So we're basically, as filmmakers, just giving the audience what they want sometimes, because we don't have that sort of opportunity budget right now, at least during a pandemic, to make films what we want. Like I just mentioned, I had to make the second film an entertainment film because it's on roadkill, so it's more relevant to everybody, and I can't go the same road that I have for the other project. So it is very repetitive. It is a lot of, But in terms of wildlife, at least, what I don't like is they say a lot of the voiceovers and narratives say things like there are 40,000 fishes left, right? And people think, oh, it's just 40,000 kafi sare. That's a lot of animals. There's still time. But 40,000 for one species is very little on the planet, It's still countable. It is not in millions, it is not in billions compared to our population. So I think filmmakers should understand what kind of content they are putting out and how they are framing their words and how they are writing things. Even there was a Hindi film which sensitized some sort of violence, a lot of Hindi films, and people would argue with me saying it's not the filmmaker's responsibility to decide what people think. People should be mature enough to understand what to take from it and what not to take from it. But let's be honest, we watch films as a mode to escape. It is indulgence. It is always going to be indulgence. That's why it's an entertainment. So people are subconsciously watching films, When you watch a documentary, you're still a little alert, but when you're watching films or when you're watching something that's entertaining, it's all on a subconscious learning level. So as a filmmaker, you should see what you're saying and how you're saying it and what kind of message in the larger scheme of things is it putting across.
So you're basically saying filmmakers have the moral responsibility to contextualize what they're saying. Let's take the fishes example. If they say 40,000 fishes, they should contextualize it in the larger scale of things. So, 40,000 is very bad for one species, like you said. So do you think there should be more of that happening, and why is it not happening? Or is there some sort of hidden agenda in the filmmaking world? Why aren't they contextualizing it?
Of course there's an agenda. Because they have to make it work for the story they're working on. They've started like the GhostNet example, right? I started working on it. I decided, I want to make a film on it. I got the budget, I got everything, and then your research, like Indian research, doesn't have any reports on how many ghost nets are there. So now I can't say, oh my god, this was a mistake, right? I can't say, oh my god, I've got the budget, I've figured everything out, and I can't give up on stuff. When something like that happens, we start going in reverse and verifying our theories. So then we look for content which fits our story. Like we will talk about 46% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is ghost nets. So this is not relevant to India, but it fits my story. So it gives you an idea of what is happening on the global scale, but it's not specific to me. So then I would not, I've seen another film or other projects, not naming any, but there are some on Netflix which are about seafood, and they are very whitewashed because it works for them, it works for their narrative. So sometimes, and also depending on who sponsors you, what they want to hear at the end of the day, it is a script, so what they want to hear is what they will put in the story. So of course there is an agenda, there is always an agenda.
Let's talk about the financing of a wildlife film. As a director, or as a director of a wildlife film, how much control does one really have over the narrative, especially when it's being financed by someone, let's say, like big players like Nat Geo or Discovery or something like that? How much creative control does the director have, and how much moral authority does the director have to portray what's happening on ground?
This is a little long answer because it talks about the industry. So basically there are two kinds of films. Films are commissioned, and some of them are sponsored. Commissioned are basically, like Netflix originals and all of that, or BBC or whatever. So BBC operates in two ways. They basically give you, I said basically twice, they tell you that they want XYZ shots, like, I want Arrowhead hunting. Arrowhead is a tiger in Ranthambore. I want a shot of her hunting and doing a deer kill or a barking deer kill. It's that specific sometimes. Or if you are doing something on a landscape, if it is about a state, then you leave it to what the shots make out of it. What story comes out of the shots, what footage you're able to get. So the director can decide if they want to go with this particular story and then demand shots, or they want to work on XYZ topic. Like if you're doing on ghost nets, because that is something I have worked with. I worked based on what footage I got. I took the interviews and then I saw what they said and I filmed B-roll. And because, events like discarded net are not in our control. I can't say go and film it. I can't ask anybody to film it. You don't know what the probability of that is. Like a hunt is comparatively like a regular activity for the tiger, but an entanglement is not, because the ocean is very dynamic, and it's a lot of factors come in. So it depends on your topic. Or if it is like a one-off event, like if it is some eclipse, if you need that specific footage, and if you miss it, then you have to rewrite your story. Like one of my friend was working on a pangolin story, and towards the end of it, some commissioners don't they're okay with older shots, like from another shoot, but some of them want fresh shots which are done during that time. So if you're making a story on a pangolin and you don't get a pangolin shot in that 10 period, they will rewrite the story. So it depends on that. It is a lot of control, but the producers have a large say in it as well.
What I understand is most of the film is made on the edit, and you work according to what shots you get, or else you go out and reshoot.
In most cases, yeah. Like if it is on a tiger, if it is the life story of Sundari, or if the life story of Machli, or the one in Pench who recently died, Colorwali, if it is something like that, then they will want specific shots, like to show her birth, her the hunting, the mating, that sort of a thing. But if it is about Pench Tiger Reserve or National Park or whatever, then it can be a little bit more general. It depends on what your story is about.
Now let's talk a little bit about what the wildlife filmmaking space is like in India, especially. Like, I know for a fact that working in advertising and working in Bollywood can be very tiring. You have very long days, and it's a very toxic work environment. What's it like in the wildlife space? Because the way I see it, wildlife people they're very driven by the cause, so they have to be empathetic and understanding.
That's two different questions. That's two different topics.
That's how I see it.
Industry or
no,
entity.
Industry is made by people, right? So the way I see it, the wildlife industry should be a little more calmer, chill, maybe.
Not really.
What is it like?
With wildlife, what people think is it's just point and shoot. You get into a jeep, you take your big cameras and big lenses, and you just film. It doesn't work like that. It is very you need a lot of patience. You cannot imagine the amount of patience you need to be a wildlife camera person, because animals, you see the footage and you think, oh, they're always moving around. They don't. You have to sit for hours, you have to sit for days, and they are usually camouflaged, So how filmmaking works is you have to sit in camouflage tents yourself, and you can't, like the distance between us, you can't be that close to an animal. You have to be really, really, really far away, so you don't affect their body language and their behavior and, their hunting and everything. So you need a lot of patience. It can make you very cranky. For women, with all the monthly things that we have, it becomes very difficult to manage that, because you're in that hide, as it's called, throughout the day for weeks, for months. With the weather, however it is, if it's raining, if it's snowing, all that is happening. So you need a lot of patience even as a camera person. Photography is very different than filmmaking. A lot of people, when I tell them I'm a wildlife filmmaker, they would tell me things like, oh, my husband or wife or partner is also a photographer. I'm not a photographer. No offense to them, but photography and filmmaking are very, very different when it comes to wildlife. And in terms of work culture, it was male dominated, like every industry is, because there was a lot of taboo about, going to these spaces, because you're alone for the time you are filming. You're alone or with one more person or one more camera person or a producer or a director. So it's a very quiet space. It's a very far off space. You have to drive at least 2-3 hours away from the city to get to a wild landscape. So there was a lot of safety issue, but a lot of females are there in the industry right now, closer to my age group. So it is becoming inclusive. There are some productions that are only for females. Like there is a film by BBC right now, which is only on female animals. Their crew is also female as far as possible. So there are project opportunities like that. There are collectives like Jackson Wild, which have like a preference, they have these smaller communities and groups which help females. So that way it is better. But in the beginning, there were these two male filmmakers, if you're listening to this, who had they wouldn't let anybody work. in the same space. They would hoard opportunities.
Was it like
And
they had created like a monopoly of sorts?
yeah, they had, and that was because most of the contacts and most of the networking happens at film festivals, international film festivals. So the access that young filmmakers like me had was very less before. Now, because Jackson Wild moved to a hybrid platform, it was easier for me to be there and talk to everybody, right? But otherwise, I would need a visa, I would need a ticket, I would need a space to stay in the UK, I would in the UK, US, whatever, wherever it is. And I would have to do all of that and then get approval from them and then buy a ticket. And in places like Wildscreen, which is in the UK, which is backed by BBC, at least it was, I don't know what the scene is now. But you need to have a film to be able to be allowed in that space. You need the ticket, and it's not cheap. Because I'm in the collective, I get these discounts, and because I was a fellow, I get all that, but it is not cheap. It's £120. It's not that easy for somebody who's just starting off. So there was a lot of gatekeeping that was happening, which has kind of diluted. I'm not going to say it stopped, but it has diluted because of a lot of organizations, a lot of people who are making it more inclusive. And also, it has kind of become the norm to at least show that you are inclusive now. So that is why they have to, before some organizations are forced to show diversity on their panels. So because of that, there is a lot more variety in the kind of people and the races and skin colors and tones and textures that you see on a panel, and genders. Yeah.
But do you not think that's like a consolation prize you're getting because they are being forced to have this diversity? Or is inclusion of any kind great?
I mean, we'll take what we get. It's better than not having it at all, right? Because then they would just discuss things and impose it. But right now, if there is somebody who's representing you, at least they can argue. And if anybody else doesn't listen to them, you can say, hey, at least I told you. So at least there is that benefit of doubt in forced inclusion.
I like what you said. Forced inclusion is nice. Let's talk about the finances of making films for a minute. How much does it cost to make a wildlife film? Or any film for that matter, but let's focus on wildlife film because you've done work in that. What is a comfortable budget? Let's break it down.
Wildlife films are very expensive. They look pretty because they have that kind of money put into it. You need 4K. 4K is also outdated now in wildlife. They
Really?
use 8K cameras, yeah. So the problem with 8K is that some intern somewhere has to sit and log it. So they have to sit and slog and convert and see and reconvert and do all of that. And then again for common viewing, it's brought down to 1080, or it's some version of HD or whatever works in our systems. So that way there are specific productions which need a particular camera, which need a RE, which need a red. But not everybody works on that, like again, there are two kinds which say I need this specific camera, and the other is like, okay, I need this content. It needs to be in 4K. You can film it on any camera that you want. But the budget, we hardly get any money. Assistants, directors, anything compared to the overall budget get peanuts because all the money goes in travel, all the money goes in filming and in equipment. Because it's not like fiction. You can't say shot A, shot B, shot C, done. It is, you're rolling, you're just rolling, you're rolling for days and hours, and the animal's just sleeping. But you can't turn off your camera and be like, okay, I'll read a book, I'll look at my phone, I'll scroll through Instagram, because you can get that shot in any moment. It is an animal, it's a wildlife, it doesn't know what's going to happen. And sometimes whenever we're logging, for example, we can't skim through it. We can't just be like beginning and end. You have to watch everything, because if it's a camera trap, sometimes it's a 2-second clip of that tiger doing something, and if it's mating or if it's pooping or whatever, So you have to be very patient, and all of this requires high-end equipment. So IR is there, and those lenses are there, and everything happens. Like there is a lens which is a 400-1000 of Canon, which is I think 60 lakhs or something. So if there is a camera person who has that, then they charge around 40,000 per day. So it depends on what equipment you have and how much of an expertise you have. and you can either demand like a particular fee, like from 25 to 40, depend on how much of an expert you are per day, or you get like on project basis. So if it's project basis, it's generally low. It's like 25,000, 30,000 per episode. And if you're a senior, then it's 40 per episode. Compared to camera people who get like 40,000. The high-end camera people get 35, 40,000, but they need their own equipment. So the budget right now would be something around 18 to 20 lakhs, which is less for fiction and ads, for like a half an hour project, including editing, but very, very basic editing. So maybe 20 per episode is for like a medium budget. But there are films in India which are also 2 crores, you know. If it's a natural history film, which is only wildlife without any conservation, then that can be 2 to 3 crores also.
Is there a lot of money in wildlife?
No. The finance bit is, like we mentioned before, on how many things you can do. You know, if you are somebody who can film and direct and produce and send edited logged content, then you can charge 80,000 per day. You know, if you just have if you don't have camera, you can charge 20,000. If you have a camera, you can charge 40,000 per day. If you are just an assistant and somebody, not just, if you're an assistant and somebody who's starting out, then you will get like 15, 20. If you are somebody who, if you're a seasoned assistant, then you can get something like 35. But that is also, you do a lot more work for that much money. And if you look at it from a freelancing or a fiction perspective, it's quite low.
Let's pivot from the finances and let's talk about impact campaigns. Because the way I see it, you're a change maker. Through your films, you're trying to positively impact the communities and people you're filming. You were running an impact campaign with your film Tangled Seas. Can you tell me a little more about that? But before that, can you tell me what an impact campaign is?
So, conservation films internationally, and India has started that recently as well, have something called an impact campaign. Impact campaigns are campaigns that run along with the film or after the film, which ensure that the conservation issue that your film is addressing gets some sort of justice, or something happens to change the way things are with that conservation issue. Like policy change would be something, awareness would be something, petitions would be some thing which all goes, or you know, campaigns like what Tangled Seas has. There was something called Ban the Butt, which was about cigarette butts. Then we have a petition, we have a repository where you can store data about ghost nets, and you know, that helps you locate where these nets are, what is causing them, which can be used for research. And you know, we're also looking at petitions which have policy change, because at the end of the day, unless you don't put a rule or policy, things are not going to change. And when you work on an impact campaign, you have to be careful that it affects and it includes all the stakeholders of the conservation issue that you're looking at. In the case of Tangled Seas, you can't really talk about only fishermen and ignore the divers. You can't talk about large-scale fishermen and ignore the small-scale fishermen. You can't talk about tourism initiatives and forget the marine biologists. You know, whatever demand that you have through your impact campaign should be inclusive, that it finds solutions for everyone, or at least the most vulnerable stakeholders of that ecology or that conservation issue. Because otherwise, you are just going to make temporary change and your movie will be over, your campaign will be over, and the situation will be back to square. So there was a film called Sea of Shadows, which asked TikTokers to put a link of their campaign in their bios. And TikTok is not something that is as famous or allowed in India, but it was a big deal for wildlife films, or you know, smaller projects comparatively, for to get that sort of coverage. At the end of the day, when we need petitions, when we need change, when we need policy, we need signatures, we need more people to be aware about it. The more mainstream it becomes, the faster you get solutions. You know, COVID, for example, because everybody got it, that's why we got a vaccine so fast, you know. Otherwise, it's just lying somewhere. If a smaller population is affected, nobody really cares about it. So the more people who participate in your impact campaign, the faster it moves, or the more magnitude it has.
What was the impact campaign for Tangled Seas like?
We have a petition that is going on right now. So we have demanded things like simple things like giving a shelter to small scale fish workers and fishermen and fisher folks. So ghost nets are basically created because of wear and tear of the net. There's a storm, or there is something that the net becomes brittle because of direct exposure of sunlight, and it breaks off, or sometimes they cut it because they want to leave a protected animal, or sometimes it breaks off on its own. So something as simple as providing a shed would solve that problem. It would increase the life of the net, of the fishing net. Also, things like funding research for change of material, because initially fishermen used cotton based or comparatively biodegradable material, not the nets that we have. We had this whole economic boost that we wanted, and now it's just going to become worse with the blue economy thing coming.
What is the blue economy?
Blue economy is like how we had the green revolution and the white revolution. There's something that the government is trying to do with the fishery sector right now. So they will just want to show produce, they will just want to show numbers. So when that happens, there is compromise on quality. They just want to show conversions, like this year versus that year. This is the number we got. This is the number. This much tuna was there and this much tuna is there now. So when that happens, which also happened, I think in the 70s sometime, when they shifted to nylon. So if we demand a change of something that is affordable and still comparatively biodegradable, then it would help the ghost net problem. Also, third thing what the petition had was giving a market. Once you remove the nets, the divers and the fishermen remove the net out of the ocean, what with that? A lot of collection is happening right now, but it's just lying somewhere because they don't know what to do with those nets. It's not plastic. It's not sellable plastic. It's not a PET bottle. It's a net. So you can use it, maybe you can repurpose it into something, but unless the government takes it up and recycles it and does something properly with it, it makes no sense. So there needs to be a market and an incentive for the fishermen. Divers get it as a part of Dive Against Debris and whatever. Divers see marine wildlife and they get out the nets because they care about it. But fishermen don't. I mean, it is a financial loss to them, but they still need an incentive to get those nets out. There are many things like that. These are just 3 out of those things in the 5 demands that we have in the petition. But there is a petition, there is a repository that we have, which I've already mentioned. Repositories, basically, you can report if you find a net. Then we did Ban the Butt campaign, which basically was inspired by Chalk of Shame, which is a Swedish initiative where they went around and circled the cigarette butts that were lying on the road or around. And then when you circle them, you realize how bad the litter is. So we did a lot of awareness campaigns and a lot of screenings. But because of the pandemic, it was mostly digital. And whenever we got that little break between the waves is when we could do in-person events. But it would have been much better if the pandemic wasn't there.
I love that. The way I see you talking about this in real life, it shows that you're very, very passionate about whichever causes you put up. So I want to ask you this. Do you think that you have to be an activist to be a wildlife filmmaker?
So you don't really need to be an activist to be a wildlife filmmaker, especially if you're working on natural history films. But your business, your future of this business depends on those landscape and that wildlife. So the least you can do is just stand against, destruction of them. Because unless you want to change your career path, if the jungle forest that you're filming does not exist in 10 years, what are you going to film over there, right? So you need to stand up for the causes that your film represents and for those landscapes and that community.
But do you not think that, again, becomes very self-preservatory as well? Like, it's like you're saying if you want to have a career in wildlife, you better support these, otherwise you won't have a career in wildlife.
Isn't it factually true, though? If there is a forest, like there are all these clearances happening right now, okay? So if there's a highway through Corbett, hopefully that never happens. If there's a highway through Corbett or someplace in MP, once you put a road in that, look at me doing promotion. Once you put a road through a forest, it opens it to poaching, it opens it to a lot of evils, and then that area stops being as wild as it was. And then it degrades over time, So today, because of poaching, for example, the number of tigers reduce. And you can't rely on that same landscape to go back there and see it in 5 years. Like if you look at Planet Earth, there was... it was filmed over 10 years, I think, the first part. And they made another smaller series from it, 3 episodes, which spoke about how the landscape changed while they when they started filming versus when they ended it, so we think that we have a lot of time. We don't. These wild spaces don't. The reason we had COVID was because we are reducing the gap between wildlife and us each and every day. So, because we have impact campaigns and most films have impact campaigns, if you don't believe in that cause, it's going to be very difficult to convince others to. I mean, sometimes you have to do it just for the sake of the film, but unless you're not convincing enough, you're not going to get anywhere. And your peers are going to see that. You have to believe in, like, even with fiction, you have to believe in the script. So, like that, you have to believe in the landscape or the animal.
Very interesting answer, Akansha. Last time we spoke, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about despair and hope. Last time we spoke, you told me something along the lines that by 2040, the planet may become even worse because of the climate emergency. And as someone who works closely monitoring these kinds of things, how do you keep hope and how do you deal with it? Because I know for a fact that I can't. Whenever I see horrid whenever I see horrid news of, like, let's say, a natural disaster happening somewhere in Japan or anywhere else in the world, it's just horrible, and the scale is completely unprecedented. And from what I've read, things are only going to get much worse. As someone who works in the space, how do you keep hope? How do you and your colleagues talk about this kind of stuff? Because the things that you're trying to preserve may not just be there anymore.
So there is something called eco-anxiety, which is very recent, where it is a form of anxiety, but it is because of the ecological events happening around us on the planet and just our environment. So all of us have faced that, especially with the pandemic and everything that came with it. It just increased. It became really bad. But we have to realize and identify that we are not the problem. You and me, no matter how much these corporates tell us, buy a bamboo toothbrush or buy a metal straw, I'm not the problem. You are not the problem. The top 100 industries that are the largest polluters are the problem. Companies like Shell is the problem. The ones who get oil companies are the biggest problem. So once you identify, once you understand, and you become you stop being so hard on yourself, and you realize that it is not you and I who are doing this. Our impact is very, very minute compared to the damage they are causing to the planet. You realize that you being anxious is not really going to get it anywhere. You can just work with communities. It has become so bad and it is so damaged right now that you cannot make a global change because capitalism will never let it happen. We all know that the sixth mass extinction is happening, and unfortunately we are definitely going to be a part of it. So no matter how much we deny and we say, because we can think, we say that, oh, we are like this elite species on the planet. We're not. We are going to be a part of it. 1 million species with us are going to be a part of it. We were the meteor that the dinosaurs faced, right? And a lot of people in this industry know that as a fact. And you can see it's the third year into the pandemic, right? When we were growing up, when did we have? We had like swine flu, which went off in like a few months. It's just going to get worse. And there was something Neocove, which, I mean, with the bats, that doesn't even have, it's not come to humans yet, but it doesn't even have a cure. Most of the new things that are happening, Ebola didn't have a cure. A lot of things are going to happen. So it is still going to happen in the background. So we have to just tell ourselves that make your films, do your impact campaign, try to mitigate it in smaller quantities, because if you want global change, the capitalists are not going to let that happen, no matter what you do.
So it's like you're fighting a losing battle, right? You're still holding on to hope when you know that capitalism won't let it. Do you think like a different kind of economic system may help? But the way I see it, it's just not going to happen, because capitalism has such a strong hold.
So conservationists, environmentalists, filmmakers are just giving humanity few more years on this planet. It is doomed. It is going to go down that road because people say things like 40,000 species are still there. We haven't reached the brink of it. but we are very close to it. So there is something called the Earth Overshoot Day, and it's basically the how much the resources should last us for the whole year. And last year we reached the overshoot date in July. So it's just getting worse every year, and the temperature is, if it has increased 1 degree Celsius right now, which is really bad for the oceans. If it becomes 2, then it's going to be problematic everywhere. There's going to be rise in sea levels, there are going to be a lot of problems. So coming back to what we were supposed to discuss, you can't really get worked up about it, because there is this thing that I've learned in mental health, that unless you are not okay, you're not going to be able to take care of everybody else. So sometimes you just have to get yourself together. You have to cry it out. You can cry it out. Like, if you're filming a glacier, okay, you're filming a glacier and you go, there's a lockdown for 3 months. You go after 3 months, the glacier's not there. What are you going to do? You're going to cry it out, but then you still have to film. You can, in fact, like for the roadkills film, everybody else on the crew was like, oh my God, I hope we don't see a roadkill. If I see a roadkill and we are able to document it, it will save a lot other animals, right? As somebody who is in wildlife, you have to expose yourself to it. If you don't cry, you can't make your audience cry. If you don't make your audience cry, no change is going to happen, right? A lot of people don't know how problematic it is, because the general narrative by these big guys is still that, like electric cars. Where is the electricity going to come from? Coal. Tesla and all of that is there, and everybody's like, oh my God, we're moving to electric cars. But where is that energy going to come from? Where does our internet come from? Where is my cell phone? Where are the minerals for my cell phone made from? We are so dependent on the planet's resources, minerals and materials, that no matter what you do, there is somebody who's going to be exploiting it. India is starting deep sea mining. It's going to be very, very problematic, So the battle is lost, and everybody who joins wildlife or environment should just be aware of it and know how taxing it's going to be, and then decide that, I want to do something about it. So you have to be prepared if you want to get into this.
Cool. I think that has been everything I wanted to ask you. One last question before we end the show. What do you envision for the wildlife space in India? Do you think it's going to get better? Do you think it's going to get worse?
So it is getting better, because there is a lot of representation happening. A lot of people from different communities, different genders, different identities are becoming a part of the, you can't say mainstream storytelling, because mainstream would mean natural history filmmaking, but they are getting more platforms to show their stories. There is a lot of variety, and there is good future and hope for this industry, provided the landscapes still exist. Because in terms of the clearances, they're really bad. So if the landscapes exist and the wild spaces in India continue to exist, the future of the industry is great. Otherwise, it's not.
Do you think the government would support conservation?
No, they are the ones who are doing the clearances.
But I mean, I'm feeling so heartbroken by everything you've told me today. But how I'm still having a tough time trying to understand how you still keep going and how you still keep hounding the government to do better.
I mean, somebody has to do it, If you make a commerce person the minister of environment, what do you expect? Not that you need to have a science background, that's not what I meant, but somebody who has zero exposure to the industry that you're a minister of, what do you expect is going to happen? If you make the minister of industries and environment the same guy, who do you think is going to be a preference? Which industry is going to be a preference? So governments will come and go, all these things will happen, but like, mole, for example. Have you heard of the molem, Mollem in Goa?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pronounced as mole, right? So people demanded, they sat on those railway tracks, they did all the protests, they made petitions, and then that stopped. That is the only way to go about it. You keep screaming and delay it. Either you stop it, but stopping is, again, a new government will come and find another way to get that property, or whatever, and make a 3-lane, 4-lane, 10-lane highway out of a road which is not even used, or make a coastal road, which, so the coastal road was not really needed. They could have just made like a higher bridge and not destroyed the whole intertidal area of Mumbai, but that's gone now. And that is extremely scary because Mumbai is very prone to flooding. And the next time there is a flood, it's going to come all the way. The only safe place, if you look at is Sanjay Gandhi National Park, because it's a national park, because it has those kind of trees. But if you don't demand that, if you don't get together and demand that sort of, if you don't create a controversy out of it, that's how governments operate right now. There is no way around it.
Wow. Interesting. Very cool. Okay. Before we end, there's just one question. On Twitter, I'd asked, I'm recording
I saw that
podcast with a very cool wildlife filmmaker who's not on Twitter. Get on Twitter, Akansha.
I am on Twitter.
One of the questions I got from people is, Nishtha asks, okay, don't laugh, but do animals look as cute up close as they do otherwise? Or do they look only scary then?
So we have to make them look cute. They are not cute. It's wildlife. But unless we don't make it cute, you're not going to watch it. So, and we don't have that sort of, access to them, because wildlife filmmakers are really far away from where that animal is. But usually making them look, anthropomorphization of them helps people understand. Like when you compare their life to yours, it's easier for people to understand that story. Like if there are two spiders, they will say that they are dancing and they're trying to boyfriend girlfriend. They don't care, but you have to make them boyfriend girlfriend, so you have to make them cute. Otherwise you're not going to watch it, because that's wildlife and it's scary.
Very cool, Akansha. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I learned so much. And I'm also in a bit of an existential crisis right now. So thank you for that.
Welcome to my world. Thank you for including me and for this opportunity. I always love talking about wildlife and my work. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Akansha. Cool. Bye.